Zack Polanski is the man of the moment still. Over the weekend, the Green Party announced that its membership was now larger than that of the Conservatives. And today, YouGov had the Greens on 15% in a national poll for Westminster elections. That is the second pollster to put the party on 15% in just a few days, the other being found out now. YouGov is widely considered the gold standard in British polling, so even the skeptics will take this one seriously. Reform way out in the lead with 26, Labour on 20. The Tories on 17, the Lib Dems and the Greens on 15. According to our friends Stats for Lefties, that would put the Green Party on 12 seats and close to winning 10 others. Those 12 seats include 2 in Brighton, 4 in Bristol. Elsewhere, gains will be in Huddersfield, Leeds, Manchester, North Herefordshire, Sheffield. And then the marginals, which would be within the margin of error really, include Norwich South, Leeds South, Manchester Central. So they'd be very present in the major cities of England. Separate polling also has the Greens finishing above the Liberal Democrats in the Senate elections next May. According to that data, the party would end up with 3 MSs. Meanwhile, Reform are way out in the lead over Labour. Accompanying the Greens' mesmeric rise in the polls has been Zack Polanski becoming increasingly conspicuous in TV studios. And last night he appeared on Robert Peston's show on ITV. Here he is responding to a question from The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar, about Labour allowing tuition fees to rise.
Now, Zack, the government says that without a rise in fees, universities will go bust. What do the Greens say?
This is why marketisation has completely failed. If you rely on the private sector to run universities on what should be a basic human right for people to be able to educate themselves, you get into these ridiculous situations. 1 in 3 children are living in poverty. We just heard about neat children there. Meanwhile, billionaire wealth collectively goes up £35 million a day. I think ultimately the government needs to be looking at the multimillionaires and billionaires to be making sure we're redistributing that wealth, including for education.
But we know that money is extremely tight and you can't do everything. So how high up on your list of priorities would funding university education be?
Well, partly I reject the idea that money is really tight. I think we'll always see tricky decisions for university students, for migrants, for disabled people. When are we going to see tricky decisions for the very wealthy in society? That being said, education is a huge priority for me and for the Green Party. And absolutely, I'm pleased to see that this is being extended for maintenance loans to care experienced young people. But I thought Robert's questions were right there. What about the young people who are just above the threshold? They're just going to be left out to dry, and that can't be okay.
Isn't that the danger, Zack?
I don't think there's an infinite pool of wealth at all, but there is a pool of wealth. And actually, lots of these people have wealth in assets, and it's not easy to, particularly if they're buildings. The Duke of Westminster owns half of Mayfair. He can't just take up that asset and be internationally mobile.
But he can, as he did sell 25% of his real estate portfolio.
Well, let's make sure that we go for the other 75%. So it's ultimately about making sure that we're taxing wealth and not work.
How has that got you, by the way? How is that? He sold 25% of his portfolio. Yeah, that's subject to capital gains tax. It should be higher. Zack Polanski would say that capital gains and presumably dividends tax, right now, tax on dividends from equities and stock in companies, that's taxed at a higher rate than capital gains. And of course, incomes are taxed higher for middle and high income earners. Incomes are taxed higher than capital gains. Zack would say that, Mr. Polanski would say that they should be taxed at the same level. How has that got you? Yeah, capital gains should be higher. It should be higher. You shouldn't be taxed more for working than if somebody's selling their third property, which was an HMO. That's crazy. And it's quadrupled in value in the last 15 years. Why is that taxed at a lower rate than somebody having to go out and work? That's not a gotcha. Also, I'm really happy Zack Polanski drew into that question about, well, we know there's no money available. Did Pippa Crerar say that when Keir Starmer said that he wanted military spending to be 3.5% of GDP? Right? It's presently 2.5%. I think more or less it's looking like an additional 16, 17 billion pounds spent on defence. Who said to the Prime Minister, well, we know money's tight, Prime Minister, how are you going to do it? Nobody said it. When Trident's being renewed and it's going to cost £100 billion plus, who says money's tight, Prime Minister, how are you going to do it? No, they say, I want the big red button to be even bigger. Or the royals. We're talking about Prince Andrew earlier. Can we afford them? Nobody says we can't afford the royals. But it's, can we afford to have students in this country pay less for what they study. You know, the average nursing graduate enters the jobs market with £56,000 worth of student debt. But if you think that's bad, you're not being realistic. Sorry. You're not being realistic. You need to be realistic and accept that we have to spend £100 billion plus on Trident. Which, by the way, doesn't even work if the Americans don't want it to work. It's not really an independent deterrent. Anyway, I could talk about Trident all day, I won't. But I'm very happy he said that. We all know money's tight. Is money tight for you? How much do you want? Is it going to stop your kids going to university? By the way, I'll be totally real. If I was 18 now, I wouldn't go to university. I wouldn't. Why? Why would I do that? When I went in 2003, that question wasn't even on the table because I didn't have to pay fees. And there were fees, by the way, back then, but I came from a family that didn't have enough money. And at the time, fees were £1,100, whatever. Towards the end of that show, Peston asked Polanski about the ban on Maccabi Tel Aviv fans. The question, of course, everybody has to be asked in politics this week. And whether or not they should be able to attend that away match in Birmingham.
Your deputy leader endorsed the banning of the Maccabi fans. So where are you on it?
Well, I'm one of 5 people in British history that have been Jewish and the leader of a British political party. So I take anti-Semitism really seriously. I don't think this was anti-Semitic at all, though. There's a very big difference between being Jewish and supporting the Israeli
But your
state.
deputy leader went further and said that in general he wanted to see a general boycott of Israeli sports teams. You can't endorse that, can you?
I absolutely endorse that. In the same way we have with Russia, we're currently seeing an ongoing genocide. And actually, I think it's important that athletes are allowed to play, but to play under their state banner or a city in Israel, I think is deeply problematic.
But Israel, you have to accept Israel as a democracy, and you're basically punishing essentially innocent citizens for, it's perfectly reasonable to criticize the Israeli government, but to punish citizens in that way is surely not appropriate.
Well, first of all, protesters who were on the flotilla recently were subject to torture. They were kept in dark rooms all day. They were not treated how any democracy...
Annoyingly, I'm told, which is really frustrating because I wanted to bring Katie in, but I'm out of time. That's it. So here's my closing thought.
I'm wearing an earpiece, right? There's somebody in the earpiece going, okay, Robert, Bobby, wrap it up, okay? Okay. And it's so great. There's just such a lack of equivocation there. You can't possibly... I do. I 100% accept that they shouldn't be in UEFA, pal. What are you going to do about it? And by the way, my party's polling 15% according to YouGov. You can't call me irrelevant. But you have to... Surely you have to accept... No, I don't. I don't have to accept anything. I disagree with you. No, but you have to. It's not appropriate. Yes, it is. These are ordinary Israelis. They shouldn't be punished. There was a 72-year-old RAF veteran kidnapped by the IDF in the Eastern Mediterranean. What did you say, Robert Peston? Why do you care more about the well-being of Israeli football hooligans than a 72-year-old RAF gentleman who ended up being kidnapped and taken to a prison in the Negev desert? Why do you care more about them than that guy? I want to know. What, that's appropriate? It's appropriate for a 72-year-old RAF veteran to go to prison for doing nothing. He was arrested in international waters. That's appropriate, but this is not appropriate. This is not appropriate. Surely it's not appropriate. This is how they work. Surely it's not appropriate. You have to have, by the way, you have to have you have to be a very strong person, very strong character to say, actually, I think it is. Completely disagree. You have to be a very strong person to go into a TV studio from a small political party. He's not even an MP. It takes a big character to do that. And I have to say, I'm not a Green Party member. I voted Green in the last general election. I said that Zack Polanski was the best out of all the people standing to lead the Greens. I said that. I had no idea he was this good. Genuinely. I had zero idea. Every time he goes on the TV, he gets better and better. And the thing is, we all have off days, right? Sometimes I'll host a show, and I think it's a great show, showed us well. Sometimes today, for instance, I've had a cold for 3 days. You're not on top of things. Every time I see Zack Polanski on TV, he brings 100%. He brings his A game. Really, really important in politics. You cannot have off days. You'll be punished. He's very good. He's very good. Kieran, Is the Polanski bubble going to burst?
All right, before I get to Zack, let me just say one thing about the comments of Peston's at the end there. In a sense, he's doing us a favor. I mean, he's right. Israel is a democracy for Israeli Jews. And I think it's important to say that while also acknowledging the obviously rank exclusion of so-called Arab Israelis, both constitutionally and de facto socially from everyday life. Because what it does is it shows us that ordinary Israelis have a say in the political process and are therefore themselves also responsible for the genocide in Gaza, right? That's a very, very bitter pill for the liberal Western establishment to swallow. And because it always has to be some dictator's fault, or it has to be an authoritarian regime or a bad leader, Netanyahu, shadowy forces, or it's almost like the flip side of a conspiracy theory or something. It can't be more complex, and responsibility can't be distributed among so many people. I mean, not the innocent Israeli public. No. So actually, it's kind of useful. I mean, he's obviously deploying it for purposes quite to the contrary. He's saying they're innocent people. Actually, how can you do this? But no, what he doesn't realize is that he's implicating them by pointing out that Israel is a democracy, which of course it's not. It's an ethnocracy. But for Jewish Israelis, it is a democracy, right? And I think that that's useful in the context of the genocide in Gaza. So own goal from Peston, a goal for all of us who want to, as I say, attribute responsibility proportionately and appropriately. To Zack. Zack is, I don't want to sound unfamiliar. Sorry, that's a bit cringe. Zack Polanski is going from strength to strength. He is a much more impressive operator and performer than he was even before I went on the flotilla, I have to say. So I didn't get that much Polanski news while I was away. But since I've come back, I've been really, really impressed catching up on how much more robust he is. Forget polished. Loads of politicians are polished, but there's no substance. There is both substance and style at the moment. There's a kind of Goldilocks thing going on for Zack Polanski. And I think that is really rare in modern politics. And it's especially rare on the left, partly because maybe we get a harder deal than anybody else. We get, scrutinized more forensically and more unfairly than anybody else. So, maybe the dice is, or I should say the die are loaded. But Polanski is dealing with that really, really well. He's a very good performer. He's a good operator, and there seems to be a lot of substance. He seems to be a good thinker. He seems to have good thinkers around him. And so long may that last. Can it burst? Of course it can. Of course it can. If Zack Polanski carries on going at the pace he is, he will become a serious electoral proposition. Now, does that mean I think he'll beat Farage? It's possible. Anything's possible. I don't think so, but it's possible. And of course, I hope so. Does it mean that he could win 30 seats? I saw your interview with the person. I'm so sorry, I can't remember her name, but the Green Party lady who said to you that at the conference, she thinks 30 seats is a minimum. And that's the right attitude. Of course it is. If that's the case, if that translates to reality, then the Israel lobby is going to go for Zack, hammer and tong. I did it again. Zack Polanski. It's going to go for Zack Polanski, hammer and tong. And so I think, in the same way that in 2017, just before the surprise election in 2017 that ate into Theresa May's majority and created essentially a hung parliament, just as at that point in time, the mainstream media had barely laid a glove on Jeremy Corbyn, I think we should expect, and I'm sure Zack Polanski does expect, and I'm sure his strategists are preparing for, more of a glove to be laid on him if it looks like what is right now a political force is becoming a viable electoral force, because he's made his views on Palestine and so on unequivocal, which is great to see and very refreshing. But yes, The Israel lobby will come after him hard. And yes, there has to be a strategy for that. And so far, the strategy seems to be don't give an inch. And that's the right strategy. So let's see how that goes as we move forward.
Yeah. I mean, he's only been the leader of the party for more than a month. I think 5 weeks. Maybe six weeks. I think it's the 6th week, actually. They've, more than doubled their membership? Overtaken the Tories, polling 15% in 2 separate pollsters. And he's on the TV all the time. He's on the TV all the time, by the way, because they all think, I'll be the one that cancels him. I'll be the one that scuppers his momentum. But because there is substance there, and I think that's really wise what you said, Kieran. He's not polished. He's that as well. He's not a polished political figure. He's a substantial one. There's something there. If somebody says, surely you can't think this, he'll say, no, I do. Sorry. Which is quite unusual in politics. Farage had it. Still does have it. It's very unusual to see somebody from the left have it and be unapologetic about it. It was very hard, of course, for Jeremy Corbyn because he had to manage this very large party, which included many MPs, most of his MPs, the vast majority of his MPs, who hated him. They wanted him to fail. It's easier for Zack Polanski, but right now he's pulling it off.